Stop everything. Look at the tactical map. Forget the press briefings and the sanitized statements on your screen. Over the last 24 hours, the architecture of conventional warfare has been fundamentally rewritten. There are three active coordinates, three tactical realities that the Pentagon and the IDF are currently attempting to classify. Coordinate 1, Dimona and Arad. Iranian ballistic missiles successfully penetrated the Israeli air defense grid. They struck just kilometers from the Negev Nuclear Research Center. We have at least 200 severe human casualties recorded on the ground. But look at the reactor core. Total information blackout. The military is refusing to release satellite imagery. Not a leak, not a rumor. This is an active tactical cover-up. Not knowing if the core is compromised is the actual threat. Coordinate 2, the Persian Gulf. Swarms of Iranian suicide drones targeted critical infrastructure across Kuwait, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia. But here is the operational anomaly. Kiev just confirmed the deployment of 228 Ukrainian electronic warfare specialists to those exact nations. Ukrainian operatives are currently intercepting Iranian hardware in the Middle Eastern desert. Let that sink in. Coordinate 3, Baghdad International Airport. The primary logistical and diplomatic hub for the United States military, struck by 6 to 8 consecutive waves of rockets and unmanned aerial vehicles right before dawn. The casualty report for American troops? Classified. Absolute silence from Washington. That silence is the single most dangerous intelligence blind spot on the board right now. 3 coordinates. 3 distinct failures of the conventional defense grid. Which brings us to the exact hardware that broke the shield. We begin with the exact hardware that broke the shield. This is development number 1. Look at the telemetry data over Dimona and Tel Aviv. The weapon of choice to breach the airspace was not a traditional, high-yield single warhead. It was a cluster munition ballistic missile. To understand why this specific platform caused a critical failure in the defense grid, we have to look at the physics of terminal phase interception. The conventional defense doctrine of the West relies on a very simple premise: hitting a bullet with a bullet. Systems like the Arrow 3 and David's Sling are undisputed engineering marvels. They track a single hypervelocity thermal signature in the upper atmosphere. The targeting computer calculates the exact intercept vector. The interceptor launches, matches the trajectory, and neutralizes the kinetic mass before it reaches the surface. But the Iranian forces altered the terminal phase parameters. Instead of one solid warhead hurtling toward the Negev Nuclear Research Center, the payload opens midair. It suddenly disperses hundreds of independent bomblets across a massive geographic grid. The moment that separation occurs, the targeting radar on the ground is blinded. It goes from tracking one distinct, predictable object to tracking a chaotic cloud of metallic debris and micro-munitions spreading out at Mach 5. The computing architecture of the defense system is instantly overwhelmed. The interceptor missile flies into a cloud of radar white noise. It might destroy one submunition. The other 199 continue their descent uninterrupted. This tactic is not about vaporizing a hardened underground bunker. This is about maximizing surface structural damage. It is an area denial strategy. By blanketing the surface area with unexploded cluster munitions, they immediately exhaust the explosive ordnance disposal units. You cannot launch a counterstrike, you cannot resupply, and you cannot operate a military installation if your runways and access roads are littered with active submunitions. The logistics freeze. Which brings us to the second piece of hardware: the Persian Gulf, Kuwait, the United States bases. The deployment of the Shahed 136, recognized in some theaters as the Geranium 2. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps did not send these autonomous swarms to destroy reinforced concrete. They sent them to destroy the logistical math of the United States military. A Shahed drone cost approximately $10,000 to manufacture. It is essentially a commercial engine strapped to a fiberglass delta wing, packed with a rudimentary guidance system and explosives. They fly at extremely low altitudes, skimming the desert floor to remain under the radar horizon. The curvature of the Earth hides them until they are merely miles away from the target. When they finally breach the detection threshold, they force the defense grid into an immediate automated reaction. And that is the trap. A Patriot PAC-3 interceptor missile costs roughly $4 million. $4 million to shoot down a piece of fiberglass. If a swarm of 50 drones approaches the Mina al-Ahmadi refinery, the defense grid must expend $200 million of high-tier munitions in less than 10 minutes to achieve a zero impact rate. That is the required math for a perfect defense. This is not a tactical engagement. This is a deliberate, algorithmic draining of the adversary's supply chain. They are forcing the wealthiest militaries on Earth to bankrupt their own defensive stockpiles. It is the absolute peak of asymmetric warfare. That is the kinetic reality on the ground. Which brings us to the battlefield paradox. The complete disconnect between the raw data and the political narrative. Immediately following the heavy impacts at Arad and the surrounding sectors of Dimona, the Israel Defense Forces and the High Command released an official operational assessment. Quote, "The air defense systems operated as designed, and we are in control of the situation." End quote. Listen to that quote again. We are in control of the situation. Here is the reality of that control. The multi-layered defense grid, arguably the most advanced and densely packed interlocking radar network ever constructed, was breached by conventional heavy munitions. It did not hold. At Arad, the ballistic cluster munitions struck the residential grids mere seconds after the early warning sirens activated. There was zero actionable time to seek shelter. The saturation strike completely broke the timeline of survivability. Because the interceptors were overwhelmed by the cluster separation, heavy conventional warheads detonated at street level. Soroka Hospital was immediately forced to bypass standard operations and activate a mass casualty incident protocol. The triage centers flooded. The official declaration of an impenetrable sky has been fundamentally shattered by the brutal physics of a saturation attack. The shield was designed for a specific type of war. The enemy is fighting a different one. We have established the hardware. We have exposed the failure of the defense grid. Which brings us to the strategic doctrine, the why behind the targets. This is not a traditional war of annihilation. This is a masterclass in asymmetric attrition. Look back at Dimona. The ballistic missiles did not strike the core of the Negev Nuclear Research Center. They struck the perimeter. In the realm of precision-guided munitions, a multi-million-dollar missile does not miss by a few kilometers by accident. This was a calibrated, calculated demonstration, a psychological decapitation strike. By bracketing the reactor, the Iranian command sent a mathematical certainty to the Israeli High Command. The message is simple. We have the telemetry to strike your doomsday button. We have the penetration capability to bypass your Arrow 3 interceptors. We chose to hit the perimeter today. Tomorrow, we adjust the coordinates. This forces the military to anchor their remaining Tier 1 interceptors around the nuclear site. It geographically paralyzes their defensive assets. It is a checkmate in positioning. But while the heavy interceptors are anchored in the Levant, look at Mesopotamia. Baghdad International Airport, the central nervous system for United States logistics and diplomacy in the region. Between 0200 and 0500 hours, the perimeter was breached by 6 to 8 consecutive waves of drones and heavy rockets. Let us analyze the point defense systems protecting those American troops. The system is the Phalanx Close-In Weapon System, adapted for land use as the counter-rocket, artillery, and mortar system. The CRAM. It is a terrifying piece of engineering, a rotary cannon firing 4,520 millimeter rounds per minute. It creates a solid wall of tungsten and high-explosive incendiary tracers. It shreds incoming projectiles out of the sky. But the CRAM has a fatal, unavoidable flaw: magazine depth. The ammunition drum holds exactly 1,550 rounds. At its maximum cyclic rate, the weapon is entirely empty in approximately 20 seconds. 20 seconds of continuous fire. The proxy forces launching the attack know this mathematical limit. They do not fire to hit the target on the first wave. They fire to empty the magazine. Wave 1 triggers the automated radar. Wave 2 forces the engagement. Wave 3 exhausts the ammunition drum. The gun goes silent. The barrels are smoking. The automated reload process requires human intervention and takes precious minutes. Wave 4, 5, and 6 fly over the silent guns and strike the barracks. This is why the casualty report for American personnel at Baghdad International Airport is currently classified. The Pentagon is not gathering facts. The Pentagon is managing a tactical disaster. The silence from Washington is absolute. Admitting that the CRAM grid was bled dry by cheap autonomous drones is to admit that every forward operating base in the Middle East is fundamentally undefended against a swarm protocol. This exact vulnerability explains the anomaly in the Persian Gulf. This is why 228 Ukrainian electronic warfare specialists were quietly deployed to Kuwait, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia. The United States and its allies know they cannot shoot their way out of a saturation strike. They do not have the interceptor depth. They need the exact operatives who spent the last 3 years fighting Russian Shahed swarms in the snows of Eastern Europe. The Ukrainian mercenaries are not there to fire missiles. They are there to hack the spectrum, to deploy jamming arrays and spoof the GPS coordinates, to trick the navigation systems of the drones and force them to crash into the desert before they ever reach the refineries. The defense strategy has shifted from kinetic interception to electromagnetic survival. Because if those refineries burn, the regional military logistics burn with them. The United States has issued an ultimatum demanding Iran keep the Strait of Hormuz open. The clock is ticking down. But closing Hormuz is no longer just an economic threat. It is a military chokehold. It cuts off the refined aviation fuel that powers the United States Fifth Fleet and the regional air wings. If the fuel stops, the jets do not fly. If the jets do not fly, the airspace is lost. We have talked about the math, the interceptors, the radar grids, the strategic checkmate. Now strip all of that away. Remove the uniforms, remove the politics, remove the geopolitical chessboard. Focus on coordinate 1, the residential grid of Arad. At 0214 hours, the early warning system activates. The siren does not offer salvation. It offers an auditory countdown. For a ballistic missile in its terminal phase, the atmospheric entry to impact is measured in seconds. In Arad, there are roughly 15 seconds between the siren and the kinetic strike. 15 seconds to wake up. 15 seconds to process the sound. 15 seconds to move a family of 4 into a reinforced shelter. It is a mathematical impossibility. When the cluster munitions separate, they do not target military infrastructure. They blanket a square kilometer of civilian asphalt, concrete, and vehicles. Each submunition is designed to fragment into hundreds of lethal steel shards at waist height. The physics of the blast wave do not discriminate between a soldier and a civilian. 200 human beings. At Soroka Hospital, the mass casualty protocol strips away individual identity. The triage center becomes an assembly line of trauma. Patients are no longer names. They are categorized by color codes based on survivability. Red for immediate surgical intervention. Yellow for delayed observation. Black for expectant. The doctors do not ask about the Arrow 3 interceptors. They do not care about the Iranian proxy forces. They operate in the deafening reality of shrapnel and blunt force trauma. 200 cases of structural collapse and kinetic injuries. This is what a failed defense grid looks like on a microscopic level. It is not a red marker on a Pentagon monitor. It is the sterile, brightly lit hallway of a trauma ward at 3 in the morning, which brings us to the next 48 hours. The blind spot is widening. Western intelligence has officially lost the geographic signature of Iran's supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei. The prevailing operational assessment suggests a covert exfiltration to Moscow. While the leadership vanishes, the Israeli military is aggressively accelerating the demolition of forward operating posts on the Lebanese border. The United States ultimatum regarding the Strait of Hormuz is rapidly expiring. The board is set for a massive kinetic escalation. Based on the ammunition expenditure and the shifting of assets, we are looking at an imminent decapitation strike, or a synchronized aerial campaign targeting the core power generation grid of Iran by the United States and Israeli coalition. The moment those bombers cross the airspace, the Strait of Hormuz closes entirely. Not just a disruption, a total physical blockade of the global energy artery. The multi-billion-dollar shields have already failed. The logic of deterrence is dead. If the most advanced defense networks on Earth cannot stop a swarm of fiberglass drones and cluster munitions today, who is going to protect your city tomorrow?